Welcome to episode 7 of the Norton Nemesis 1500cc V8 rebuild, and in this episode I'm going to have a look at the cylinder heads, removing the valves and the water distribution system and sorting out a few problems. The V8 engine has two completely separate water systems and two radiators, and these steel gantries made from square section steel tube all welded together. And here's another one. This takes the water out of the front block and takes it down to the old water pump. This will no longer be needed. Here's another one. This is on the back block. It takes water from the top of the cylinder head. This will also not be needed. And this is the rear bank manifold. I'm going to convert the cooling system so it has one radiator at the front and an electric water pump that I can control with the ECU or a timer, so we can control the temperature nicely. I'm going to remove two of the three risers in the centre of the cylinder head. This will allow the water to flow up through the bottom, across the head and out through the single rising port. This makes it much easier for directing the coolant with some rubber hoses rather than those steel gantries. The water outlet ports are screwed on with 4 screws, so I loosen these off with my screwdriver and then I can remove the port from the actual engine itself. With a bit of a wiggle it pulls straight off. That's the first one away, so now I repeat it with the second one. I'm going to leave these holes open for now because when I take it out in the garden to get a good wash, I can wash inside the cylinder head nicely with a jet wash. I've machined up some replacement caps to block off the holes. I'll be fitting these later. The new caps have recesses for O-rings to make sure you get a good seal and fit nicely in the existing hole. The cylinder head castings are completely hollow between all 4 cylinders, so when these caps are in place, the coolant will flow up through the holes in the bottom at the cylinder head jointing point, up through each part of the cylinder head, cooling the valve areas, then flow out of the top and back down to the radiator in a nice controlled way. So now I can remove these caps, put those away for later. The next thing I want to do is remove all the valves. So first of all I wipe off the top of the buckets with some brake cleaner so there's no oil, so I can mark them with my pen so I can get them back in the same place on the cylinder head. Each port is actually stamped with a number to correspond. With all the valve buckets numbered, I can now get a piece of cardboard and lay out some holes to put the valves in and the valve springs so I don't lose them and keep them in the right order. And I use a magnet to lift the buckets out, being very careful to remove the shim underneath to make sure that's kept in its same place. This is the shim you use for adjusting the valve clearances. I'm now ready to remove the valves, so I use my valve spring compressor to compress the springs. With the valve springs compressed, I can use a small magnet to remove the collets. Followed by the valve spring retainer and the valve springs themselves. There's a little one and a big one. And here's the valve out of the engine. It looks absolutely unused, it's quite strange. Just a bit of dust and grit on there that's fallen down the inlet ports over the years. Probably due to the bike being run with no airbox top or filter fitted, and the inlet to the airbox is right by the front wheel, which is less than ideal. The valve stem seals are machined from PTFE and look in great condition. I put the first set of valve components in the cardboard tray, then move on to valve number 2. The buckets look in good condition and are a nice sliding fit in the cylinder head. Being a V8 engine, there's 32 valves to remove, so I take out all the inlets first. The second inlet valve slides out nicely and there's a good tight fit in the guide, which is a good thing. And it looks in really nice condition with barely any signs of wear at all. The valve seats and inlet ports are also in very good condition. Some have a slight layer of carbon on them which wipes off with a cloth. With all the valves removed from the cylinder heads, I noticed that the inlets have valve stem seals, but the exhausts don't. So I scan along looking at the rest, and I get to the last one, and that one has a stem seal. How odd. That is really strange. It either needs them or it doesn't need them. I did a little bit of research online, and it turns out with stainless steel valves and phosphor bronze guides, racing engines don't always run valve stem seals on the exhaust. Charlie Weaver's really cross. He likes consistency. I pull off the odd exhaust valve stem seal and move on to the other head, and that one's the same. All the inlets have valve stem seals and the exhausts don't. I now turn the cylinder heads over to have a better look at the combustion chambers and inlet and exhaust ports. And to my surprise, the first thing I see is some damage on one of the cylinder head combustion chambers. It looks like a valve's hit it at some time, but I don't really know. Perhaps there's been some sort of blow up during the testing stages, but this should clean out quite nicely. I look at the inlet and exhaust ports, and they initially look quite good. But as I'm scanning along, I notice that one of them's got a lot of carbon partially around the valve seat. This could be due to a lot of reasons. The valve stem isn't quite in line with the valve seat, very unlikely, or the valve might be slightly bent, or a bit of grit's got on the surface where the valve hits the valve seat, holding it off the valve seat, but we'll find out later. And as I'm scanning along, there's another valve exactly the same. I notice a shiny particle stuck on the valve seat. This could be holding the valve off. I also notice on many of the valves that the valve seats themselves don't line up with the inlet ports or exhaust ports. There seems to be a bit of an overlap that needs grinding away, but we'll deal with that later. Before I go any further, I want to take the cylinder heads out into the garden and give them a really good clean with a jet wash and some bike cleaner to remove all traces of oil and grease. It's a really nice day today. We've had quite a lot of rain, so it's nice to be outside in the sunshine. I'm using a bit of white spirit and a brush to get into all the crooks and crannies to get the oil and grease off. This works quite well as a solvent. I do it in a big plastic tub, and I can recycle this by tipping it back into the bottle afterwards and using it again. And before I jet wash it off with jet wash, I always let it evaporate off first in the sun, and then I can use my bike cleaner to give it the final finish that I need. I don't know what it is, but there's something quite therapeutic about using a jet wash. It's sort of the power of the water coming out, squirting off all the muck and the mess, years of grime. Even though this engine has sat in a museum most of its life, it's still quite dirty. I pay particular attention to the water jacket hole in the cylinder head, make sure I clear out any debris that's in there. I also check for good flow between the cylinder heads themselves, because I'll be blanking off these two ports and letting the water flow up from underneath the cylinder head, through the cylinder head and out through a single port in a conventional way. And as you can see, there's ample flow. With the initial clean finished, I squirt some bike cleaner on the cylinder heads, leave it to soak for about 15 minutes, then jet wash it off. This brings up the aluminium to a nice shiny sheen. I feel like I'm being watched, and I look across and the blackbird's having a bath. He keeps popping up to see what's going on. Then his friend the sparrow comes along for a little bit of food. With the cylinder heads cleaned, I pop them in the barbecue for 5 minutes to dry off. This ensures all the water's got out of all the drillings and cross holes. Both the cylinder heads are a snug fit in my barbecue, but I can pull the lid down, so that's just perfect. While the cylinder heads are cooling down, I think I'll have a look at the valves, put them in my lathe and clean them up, make them nice and shiny. I can also check for imperfections and see if they're bent or straight. I pick one of the exhaust valves first because they're the worst ones. They're quite carboned up. I put them in my 3-jaw chuck in my lathe, and I can use some very fine Abranet cloth to clean off the carbon. I can feel that the valve's running really true, so that's a good sign, and the carbon's coming straight off to a nice sheen underneath. These are stainless steel valves and they polish up lovely. That's one done, another 31 to go. After about an hour of cleaning, I'm really pleased they're all okay, they're all nice and straight, and they're all cleaned up nice and shiny, and they're all stacked away in my box ready for assembly later on. I glance outside, there's a pigeon resting in the middle of the grass. He looks really contented. The next thing to look at is this damage to this combustion chamber surface. It looks like it's had an impact with something quite hard at some point in the past. Maybe a valve, I don't know. But anyway, this should clean up nicely with my rotary burrs. And also I'm going to realign the inlet ports and exhaust ports with the valve seats. There's quite big steps that needs to be ground back. For the initial dressing up, I'm using my rotary carbide burrs. These remove the metal really quickly. After just a short while, it's starting to take shape nicely. It's quite a delicate operation. It takes some time to get all the valve ports lined up nicely with the valve seats. You have to be very careful as you're approaching the surface of the valve seat that you don't touch it and damage it. With all the ports roughed out, I can now move on to the cylinder head damage. The damage to the combustion chamber seemed quite bad at first, but turned out to be quite superficial. After just a few seconds of grinding, it was virtually gone, which is a good thing really. I was really pleased about that. With the worst of the damage removed, using the carbide cutters, I'd swap it over for a sanding disc. This is more controllable and takes off less metal at a time to get a fine blend and make everything nice and smooth. I'm not really searching for ultimate maximum performance. It's more like making a reliable engine that can be used in parades and track days. So long as it does 150 miles an hour, I'll be well pleased. After just a few seconds of rubbing up and down with a sanding disc, the cylinder head surface is nice and smooth now, so that's a lot better. I've just noticed this fragment of casting flash inside the inlet port on one of the cylinders. It's quite large. If that broke off, it would be catastrophic to the engine, but luckily it's quite firmly attached, but I'm going to grind it away just in case. I don't want just to make sure, because that would be really bad if that did come off. Well, that's a lot better. So now I'll just finish off my rotary sander to make it nice and smooth, and it's all done. With the final bit of polishing done, I'll give the cylinder head a good blow off with the airline to remove all the dust and debris. This will be getting a really good clean before final assembly anyway, so this is just for now. The next thing I'm going to do is fit the 4 blanking plates to the top of the cylinder head where the old exit ports used to be for the cooling system. So I first put some silicone gasket sealer around to make sure I don't get any leaks. I bought some special silicone O-rings for high temperature and they fit nicely in the groove. So now I can place the new caps on and put in the 4 screws. I machined the caps to be a nice tight fit in the cylinder head and they push down nicely and snap in place. I have to use a screwdriver to line up the threads so I can put the screws in. With all the 4 caps fitted, the next thing I want to do is check for leaks. So I'm going to use my vacuum brake bleeder and some tape over the holes to create a seal. I first use some plastic tape to seal the holes in the cylinder head, pressing down tightly with my thumb to make sure I get a good seal. With the tape firmly applied, I can now turn the cylinder head over and connect up my vacuum pump. This is a simple vacuum pump, hand operated, that I use for bleeding brakes. So I can press the rubber cap over the whole top of the port, pump away with my hand, and eventually you get quite a strong vacuum. And then I can monitor this over a period of time to see if I get any leaks. And over 15 minutes I didn't get any leak at all, so I can assume the cylinder head's good. This engine is fitted with a cast-in rotary throttle valve to control engine speed. So basically the ports are lined up with this rotary valve that slides in from the side. It's quite long, and what I'm quite surprised is that it's aluminium, rubbing against aluminium, and there's no oil because it's on the inlet side, so this is far from ideal. So what I'm going to do is get these anodized to produce a hard surface for it to rub on. With the two throttle tubes cleaned up and polished, I take them over to my local anodizing shop to be anodized. And after a few days they return a nice grey colour, which is a natural colour for aluminium. And the surface is now quite hard and smooth. I feel that this design is less than desirable in many ways, and I may well end up converting it to modern throttle butterflies, but for now, let's see if we can get this old system working. I offer up the anodized throttle tubes to the cylinder head, and they slide in much nicer, really smooth, and rotate freely, so I'm really pleased with that. I'm starting to make good progress with this engine now, with many parts sitting in the garage ready to go back together. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully by the next video I should have the gear back from the gear cutters, so I can assemble the bottom crankcases with a gearbox and clutch and the intermediate crankcase, and that'll start looking really exciting then. So anyway, I'll see you all soon.